JR is an award-winning artist, a writer, a performer and researcher, working in performance writing, digital literature and media archaeology. Her web-based works, such as Aetheric Ocean and The Gathering Cloud, have been exhibited, published, performed and presented in journals, galleries, museums and festivals around the world. The Gathering Cloud was recently published by Uniform Books, and JR also has a new book, An Ocean of Static, forthcoming from Pen in the Margins, which I believe she's going to speak about today. She's a fellow of the Eccles Centre for North American Studies at the British Library and a member of the Scientific Committee of LabEx Arts H2H at the University of Paris. And she lives in Plymouth and I believe France sometimes. Yeah.
I was hoping that was going to keep going into speculative realms. Thank you, Nathan and Erica, and everybody who's already put up with me making a lot of comments. So I think that you'll all be aware that I am coming from a quite material approach, a very interdisciplinary and multimedia, but trying to interrogate these mediatic relations as we go through all of these continuum of forms. I want to talk about relations between JavaScript and English primarily, but it's not specifically English, but how digital texts come back to the page on occasion and bring JavaScript syntax with them sometimes. All digital writing operates in in-between spaces, between the server and the client's device, between the source code and the output, between human languages and machine languages. And because all digital writing is constantly moving between spaces, all digital writing is necessarily radically atemporal. It operates in the there of the server and the here of the device, and the if of the source code and the then of what's presented on screen. A text displayed on a computer screen is always already a text in translation. John Hall notes that a screen is something designed to substitute one appearance for another. A screening is a showing and a hiding. Does it show to hide or hide to show? Before we have time to ponder this question, digital writing leaps off the screen. It speeds as light through the elemental medium of air to a light on the wet surface of the eye of the reader. Instantly, it is absorbed into the skull's dark interior. When a digital text moves across global networks, through submarine cables, through air as wireless signals, through air as light, through the eye to the brain, and then out again beyond the body, as voice, as sound, as a slide of text down a solid page. What is born across in the process? What trace of the digital endures on the page? So this paper examines the translation between contexts rather than between texts. Translation in this very broad sense has long been a part of my compositional process. Entreville, 2006, which some of you may know, so that this text that's on this screen was written by hand, by pen. It was then typed into a computer. It was emailed as a file to an editor of an online journal. It was published online, which meant that it was downloaded as a digital object into any number of computers around the world. And eventually it was reformulated into this digital version. But I'm framing this very iterative compositional process as translation or transmediation rather than remediation. Remediation as theorized by Bolter and Grusin, because I'm much more concerned with these asynchronous movements of text. beyond and through medium, rather than the discourse around remediation, which tends to focus on a relationship between old and new media. For me, there's no old and there's no new, there's many. Now I feel a bit like a Borg, but so these are the kind of relationships that I'm involved in, and then coming to digital, and then not staying in digital. So here in the background we see the text that I wrote that became the text on the previous screen, but we also see, this is my first novel, Words the Dog Knows, which was published in 2009, and the interface for the web-based work becomes a key image within the novel, operating in a different way because it's a different mediatic context. And then I used the novel as a performance script to navigate the digital text. My second book, now I'm trying to translate between two computer screens. So my second book was output and source code from a number of digital narratives, and the book was then also used as a performance script for performing these texts. And as Nathan mentioned, a recent book, The Gathering Cloud, which was a print iteration of a digital project which incorporated archival images and recent theory around cloud computing and cloud storage. But most of the paper, most of this, what I want to talk about today, is my recent book. This is one draft of the cover, which is not yet done. But An Ocean of Static, which will come out from Penned in the Margins in next month, and like the other books, the text in this book has come through digital and has come through performance and is sitting in this print medium, but somewhat temporarily. And I want to explore the idea that this print book is a transitional object, not the final that we tend to think of print publication as, but a transitional object operating between human and machine languages, and between human and machine time and space. I'm not going to frame this work as a work of translation, but rather a snapshot of ongoing processes and an interruption in those processes, and an image of a certain kind of slippage. And I might say that it's a glitch, but Nathan's quite an expert on the subject, so maybe we'll have to see afterwards. And the publisher, Penned in the Margins, which is run by Tom Chivers, he's promoting this book as my poetry debut, and I don't really know what that means, and so we have long conversations about what that means. And so for me, this book isn't made the way that I think that poetry is made. It's made of this very iterative compositional process where the writing is always becoming something else. It's always changing, and the writing is a movement. And so it's born of these very digital and very variable and performative and embodied and very material processes. And so the texts in this book, and so I keep saying texts, I keep saying the texts in this book, and my publisher would really like me to say the poems in this book. And he wants the back cover to say that cartographic and maritime vernaculars inflected with the syntax and grammar of ship's logs and code languages splinter and pulse across the page. And so I think this demonstrates that my publisher is actually a poet, splinter and pulse, because I forgot that he wrote that, and I was in this paper I was going to say that they jolt and lurch across the page, but clearly splinter and pulse is better. So, there hasn't been much to lose in this conference so far, but I'll just have this one quip of how Deleuze and Guattari talk about that there's no difference between what a book talks about and how it's made. And so this book is talking about about generations of transatlantic passages performed by ocean currents and wind currents and ships and packets of information, of post, but also digital packets, passages of pens writing about these passages, passengers, humans, but also birds, fish. And the book is made of fragments. It's made of other books. It's made of archives and ship's logs and source codes and JavaScripts and scripts for live performance. And so you'll notice throughout this paper that I tend to string sentences together like this with a sort of statement followed by a long string of clauses. And that's because I'm talking about a book that's made of variables. It's made of strings or JavaScript arrays. And it's made of arguments, which may explain why I've been so argumentative this past 2 days. So the working title for the book, when I was putting it together, was called Arguments to Prove a Passage, which is a phrase borrowed from a 16th century text that was written to raise funds in support of an expedition for a Northwest Passage. So arguments to prove a passage, as in you should, this is why we know that there must be a passage, so you should spend a lot of money on very expensive ships. So this term, arguments, an argument is a process of reasoning, and to prove, obviously, to demonstrate by experiment through a sequence of procedures, and a passage is a channel, an opening, a journey from one place or condition to another by pen or by signal through a network or by a ship over sea. And a variable is a placeholder, and an argument is what fills it. So my title turned out to be a variable, a placeholder, and my publisher argued for something catchier. And we went with an ocean of static, which is a phrase borrowed from one of the text/poems in the book. And I'm going to tempt fate and go to this other screen, which worked. So the title of the book, Aetheric Ocean, it comes from, the title of the book is An Ocean of Static, which comes from this web-based piece, Aetheric Ocean, which was commissioned by Nathan and co-commissioned with Tom, was it?
I think so, yeah, it was.
So Nathan Jones and Tom Shivers, my publisher, are in cahoots, so there's a conspiracy. And so this piece, I just want to give you a sense of it. I'm only going to talk about a tiny bit. So it's a very dark in color. It's a long horizontal scrolling piece. It's looking at the difficulty of communicating underwater, basically. So animal sounds, long distance communication sounds through electromagnetic signals through cables, but also sounding the ocean depths. And I won't go into it very deeply, but it's important for you to see that it's this long, as like a submarine cable, like a long sound going, sound wave. And it has variable texts in it. It has these static long texts like this. And it has a lot of different sound files, and it's a very and this is what I wanted to get to, is this is the line in the piece that became the title of the book. But it has a lot of play between, here's the famous French electronic music innovator Aline Radwig, but it also has media theory, it also has poetics, it also has science history, so it's a very strange mixture of texts. Mostly what I want to talk about in the paper is this one very beginning frame of the piece. The opening screen of the text. This sea is nothing in sight but isles. It's cut off here, but this sea is nothing in sight but isles. And then this diagram showing wave action around an isle in the sea, followed by this other line, Isles, which is a translation from Isles, islands, into a visual pun, plural of I wills. And I don't know if you can see, but in the paler green below that it says, what will you do? Now in the web-based piece, this text, I'm going to just go with later. In the digital piece, this text, I'll wreak havoc, that's a variable text, and it will just show lots and lots and lots of W words. W for water. These are the kind of oblique references that this work makes. And these are all W words selected from the Collins English Dictionary section on W. And for me, as a compositional process, that was a direct reference to the first computer-generated text made by Christopher Strachey in 1952 in Manchester, just down the road, where he used the thesaurus to populate his love letter generator. So kind of, just the way in literary texts refer to earlier literary texts, and novels are still referring to Shakespeare and to Ovid even. I feel that electronic literature has to refer to its antecedents in more oblique ways, more obvious ways. So these W words are, if this isle, plural, I wills, are isles, then these W words are water washing on the worshipping on the isle's shore. And not literally a text in translation, but the text is performing a process akin to translation by endlessly proposing an excessive approximations, possibilities, equivalences, however inadequate or absurd. So Nathan commissioned this piece for the electronic voice phenomenon project that he was doing, which was looking at this mix between digital writing and digital art and sound and networks. And in a few months after, I think it was only a few months after the launch of the piece, Tom Trivers wrote to me and asked me if I could do a performance version of it for an exhibition that was on at Somerset House in London called the Museum of Water. And Tom didn't know my work and didn't know that I do make performances out of everything, so he wasn't sure if it could be done, and I was like, yes! Because when I was making the digital piece, I was thinking about it as a piece in two voices. And so I took the JavaScript behind the piece and started to work on it in print in a word processing kind of way as a script for live performance. So here you'll see a lot of the water words. You'll see isle, water, downfall, front, log, mark, meadow, all, wave, waver. And so I started to take what in the JavaScript, there's a big long collection of W words. On the screen you only ever see isle plus one W word. Here in the performance script we've got something in between. The print sort of forces us to make these decisions. We can't have all of the W words, we only have some of them. I wanted just to say that I because I knew it was going to be a script for two voices, I had to work with somebody else through this compositional process. So Alison Gibb became the poor person who also had to figure out how to navigate the piece as we were performing. So this I think is her copy of the script, and you see these bits and pieces in pencil and probably red wine stains, I'm not even embarrassed to admit, and a paper clip, like what how many paper clips are in archives, and actually if you look at the Christopher Strachey papers at the Bodleian Library, there are rusted paper clips of computer printouts of the love letter generator. So I kind of love these other non-digital artifacts. Allison is going to be doing the navigating of the long horizontal piece, so she needs to write these kind of stage directions. I'm going to be reading these long arrays, so I've kept the JavaScript syntax in this text so that I can see it, so that I can understand that, you know, this is a grammatically impossible sentence, so I need to know when an array is starting and ending. So to back up for a minute, as we're talking about code literacy and JavaScript, I mean, it's not a coincidence that the name script is in JavaScript. It is a procedural language. It has to be written in a particular order in order to be performed by the computer. And you know, one of my interests is what, you know, what's carried across when we take a JavaScript and try and perform it as a human performer and create a performance script. So there are funny things about the syntax, like square brackets mean a different thing behind the screen than they mean for me. In modern editions, like Penguin Classics editions of Shakespeare, stage directions are often in square brackets like this. Enter mariners wet. And actually in other print performance script writing conventions, square brackets may mean refer to something like a localization, like hello, insert local place name. Hello, Lancaster. So that, you know, that's a convention from theater, so print publishing toward a performance script to be performed on a stage, but actually it functions exactly like JavaScript does. It's calling an argument from a list of possible arguments. So, you know, I kind of want to bring these discourses closer together. The script is some but not all of the variables. I won't go into this video, but this is a dim shadow of Jerome Fletcher. I've also performed this with Jerome a number of times. This, I think, was at the Other Room in Manchester. So these are all the W variables. And in the performance script, I've only taken some of these. I've used this as raw material, and I've taken some of them, and I've reordered them and turned them into something, you know, this is fine for JavaScript, but it's lousy on the ear. You know, it's not interesting. So I've turned it into something that's more palatable for, you know, this is what JavaScript needs to perform, but it's not very interesting on the stage. I also translated it for a print context. So in the performance of a web page on the browser, the script disappears behind the screen, and we only see the performance. And in the performance in a theater context, again, the script disappears, and we only ever see the performance of the actors on the stage. In a publication context, so this is an online journal, experimental writing journal based in the UK, 3am magazine. Now the reader sees the performance script for the first time. They're seeing what in the performance I would only be reading and they wouldn't see. But this is not the same as the performance script that we, Alice and I, or Jerome and I, are using as live performers, because this is a performance of a HTML file behind the screen. So there's, you know, there's a whole other script that's performing this representation of a performance script. And in the online, you know, for most of the history of online journals so far, they've continued to be basically exactly like print journals, still pages. In this case, when you look at it online, you see up here it says I'll win. It's calling a iframe, so it's actually a variable text, constantly changing, and so it's an interruption. It's part, you know, it's part performing as a digital text, and it's part performing as a page, and it's part performing as a performance script, and a JavaScript is performing in order to perform this page. Are you with me? And so
5 minutes, okay?
yeah, I'm gonna speed up. I'm afraid. So, Hybrid, we mentioned yesterday, is a journal published by Paris 8, by the LabX research group at Paris 8. So Alexandra Samar, who was here yesterday, invited me to present to publish something in this Hybrid. So I took before this publication, I translated the performance script from a experimental poetry context to an academic conference context for a conference on sound art at Cambridge University. So in order to present an academic paper about this work, I had to follow the conventions of the work. So I organized the whole paper to be read as I scrolled horizontally through the work. So the paper became a sort of performance of the and I keep doing that. So in order to, so what I sent Alexandra for Hybrid was a translation for Page of the conference paper, which of course is always a performance because we're saying it out loud. And so then it's an online publication, and in a way it's using the mechanisms of citation to explain a lot of the text that has gone into the digital piece and has gone into the live performances. So in the conference paper version, we see where this line comes from this a text from 1586 by John Davis of Dartmouth, Devon, which is near where I live in Devon, and he went on an expedition in search of the Northwest Passage, and he wrote that this land is nothing in sight but isles. So now, however many years later, I've translated this to be, the sea is nothing in isles, is nothing in sight but isles. So I'm calling this a translation because, okay, I just changed the word, fine, but I'm translating it from a context of a ship's log into this kind of source code, this kind of context, this digital context, and you know, I could go on and on, but what I really want to finish on here is the same little snippet of these W words here. This is what it looks like in English in the online journal, but this, even though this is an online journal, it's still French academia. So it was translated into French, and the editors sent me a printout to go through with a pen and do the edits for, because that's the way French academic publishing works. And so this is the way that tiny little piece of text that I'm talking about, this is the way it looks in English, and this is what they sent me. So they translated all of the words, but they also translated the punctuation from straight quotes into guillemets. And I had to go through with my red pen and turn every one of these French kind of quotation marks back into a straight quote, not because I want the English quotation mark, I want the JavaScript punctuation mark. And so it became this, but of course it's still a complete failure as a translation because it's not W words and it's grammatically impossible. Je, au, en bas, tombe, devant, it just doesn't work at all. But after the punctuation mark debacle, I was exhausted and I thought, you know, let it go. And then this is what it looks like in the book. In the book version, this is what's left of this whole elaborate translation process, and there's just one other little example I'll show you, is that further along in the digital piece you saw this, and there's this line. If you can't hear sound here, it's possible. after the performance at the other room, they publish an anthology every year, so I was sending an excerpt from the performance script as a PDF to the editors, and I copied part of this text from the PDF and I pasted it into the email, and the email completely glitched it into this long, like 4 or 5 pages worth of just looping around this because the email software couldn't understand the PDF, and that turned into a new performance with Steve Fowler where we were riffing on this crazy glitch, and that's what it came out to in the book. So, trying to think through these material and disciplinary kind of contexts as how they affect these texts on the page, what marks are borne across on the page. That's all and more than I have time for. So thank you.